So thanks everyone for joining us. I think we can go ahead and get started, and people might continue to filter in. But welcome, thank you for being here at our February EVROOM-ZOOM. I'm gonna go ahead and actually stop sharing this. We can all try and see each other. But my name is Jennifer Zavon, and I manage the EV Cincy initiative of the City of Cincinnati Office of Environment and Sustainability. And I'm able to serve in this role through the AmeriCorps Public Allies program. And I'm so excited to be your host for today's conversation. I'm joined by a fantastic group of guests today that we cannot wait for you to hear from. And so I'm just going to go ahead and introduce who we'll have speaking with us today. From EVHybridNoire, we have both Dr. Shelley Francis, who is the organization's co-founder and co-director, and Corshonda Johnson, Equity Program Associate. We're also joined by Neda Deylami, Transportation Electrification Field Organizer at the Electrification Coalition. And prior to her current role, Neda also co-founded grassroots advocacy group, Chicago for Electric Vehicles. And last but not least, we have Billy Davis, General Manager for Jitney EV on the call. Welcome to you all, and thank you for taking the time to be here. I'm also joined by two other members of the EV Cincy team today. Carla Walker, Climate Advisor for the City of Cincinnati, and Marie McConnell, Outreach and Organizing Manager for Drive Electric Ohio. This event wouldn't have been possible without the two of them, so just a big shout out to both of you. And finally, some of you in the audience may be familiar with our EVROOM-ZOOM event series already, but for any first timers today, I'll just go through a quick overview of what these events typically look like. So our EVROOM-ZOOMs are monthly conversations on various EV topics, and they're just one activity under the umbrella of EV Cincy, which is the City of Cincinnati's public outreach and education initiative to build awareness for the benefits of EVs. We connect the Cincinnati public with the movers and shakers in the EV world, primarily in Cincinnati, Southwest Ohio. But as you'll see today, we're zooming out a bit to look at some of the work being done elsewhere in the Midwest, particularly in Cleveland and Chicago. And so a couple of things to just note about these conversations. We like to describe this format as a mashup of a webinar, a Zoom meeting, and a podcast. So while we'll have some folks presenting from a PowerPoint today, we're going to have this be a little bit more engaging than your typical slideshow presentation. So we ask that if you can, please switch on your video. You can go ahead and do that now if you haven't already. And then please drop any questions or comments that you have throughout today's session into the chat. We're going to set aside a good chunk of time to dive into those questions later in the session and to really engage you all in the discussion. And finally, while we definitely want to have a lively exchange today, we also want to make sure that we can all hear each other. So please go ahead and just mute your microphone whenever you're not speaking to make sure that we're blocking out any background noise. And with that, let's go ahead and get started. If you would all please join me in giving a warm welcome to Dr. Shelley Francis and Corshonda Johnson at EVHybridNoire to kick us off. So take it away.
Good afternoon, everybody. We're excited to be here with you today. And we were excited to share a little bit of some of the work that we've been doing over the last year. So as Jennifer shared, Shelley Francis, one of the co-founders and co-directors of EVHybridNoire. For those of us on the call who may not be as familiar with our organization, it is the nation's largest network of diverse electric vehicle drivers and enthusiasts. And our mission is to advance electric vehicle and e-mobility solutions across the United States. We want to ensure that these solutions are inclusive and equitable. And so how we do that is by engaging communities that are often left out of the e-mobility discussions. So we advocate for e-mobility solutions in underserved communities and shift the narrative about e-mobility to be more inclusive of diverse populations. And for us, diversity doesn't just mean racial and ethnic diversity, it means rural communities, it means the LGBTQI population, young professionals, women, and a myriad of other communities. So specifically, our work focuses on a mix of grassroots engagement, advocacy and decision maker education, media outreach, speaking engagements, as well as research and addressing public health issues. That work spans many aspects of e-mobility and equity, including climate justice, workforce and economic development, public health, multimodal mobility, and creative financing of e-mobility solutions. So I want to also recognize our colleague, Chad Stevens, who's on the call, who also provided support and helped us execute our methodological approach. So we can go on to the next slide. Oh, I'm sorry, Corshonda, I also want to make sure Corshonda is going to be the main person presenting today. So after I do an overview of the study, I'm going to hand off the mic to Corshonda. So the purpose of the study was really to explore the mobility needs, attitudes, beliefs, perception, and transportation needs of communities in the Cleveland metro area. We were focused on African-American communities because this is a population that is not often engaged in this conversation around e-mobility. However, based on previous research that EVHybridNoire has facilitated, as well as research by Union of Concerned Scientists and Consumer Reports, we know that Latinx and Black / African-American communities are receptive to adopting EVs and clean transportation. So we wanted to utilize a multi-phase approach to really tease out some of this information. And so the purposes, as you can see below here, focus on outreach, education, research, as well as policy change to come. So in the first phase of our work, we facilitated focus groups with African Americans ages 21 and older in the Cleveland Metro. And then we also implemented a web-based survey really to assess some of those areas where we knew there were gaps in the research. And we need to know some of this information in order to provide equitable and culturally appropriate education and outreach and engagement. So we wanted to make sure we understood participants' knowledge, attitudes, beliefs, and motivations to transition to electrified transportation. And then in the final stage of the study, we also facilitated key informant interviews with various key stakeholders from across the community. So now I will pivot and I'll turn it over to Corshonda and she will finish up the presentation.
Hello, everyone. So I'm just going to give kind of a background demographics for each phase. So with the focus groups, we facilitated 4 focus groups. All of the participants identified as African American. So we had a total of about 58 participants for our focus groups. When it came to key informant interviews, we facilitated 11 key informant interviews. And these interviews were with community leaders, different stakeholders in the area. We had some city councils, state representatives, people of that nature. And we also did a web-based survey with a total of about 50 participants. And the demographics kind of varied for this. So we had about 17% African-American, 16% Native American, 46% Latinx, and 30% white. And with the key informant interviews, all of our participants were African American, being that we were trying to target the African American community. So we're going to start with some of the key takeaways from our focus groups. When it came to focus groups, many of the questions kind of center around strategies to increase electrification and e-mobility within African American communities, messaging, marketing, and outreach, and just assessing their current transportation and the modes of transportation they use and their daily transportation habits. So from these focus groups, we found out participants are more likely to trust information if it's coming from a family member. And a big thing with the focus groups that participants mentioned is that the Lordstown plant and the GM Motors facility, the Lordstown plant is currently making and producing an electric truck. So that's good because many of them know someone or they personally work there so that they can have that hands-on experience with the technology, the different parts and production of electric vehicles. So they mentioned that was very, very important to them. And they also talked about kind of their access to charging infrastructure, or if they've seen charging infrastructure within their communities. So we from this, we saw that that was very important to have more charging infrastructure in diverse communities or traditional African-American communities, whether it's at their local grocery stores or places that they frequently visit. So some key takeaways from our key informant interviews are that rebates are super, super important when it comes to African American communities, just because it helps them. Most of the time, people, their biggest barrier is price when it comes to electric vehicle, but having these rebates, and not just having them, but educating the community on these rebates is really, really big, whether it's rebates, tax incentives, different things like that, learning that they can buy used electric vehicles. Those are very, very important. And that's what some of the key informant interviews, what some of the things that we've learned, along with the importance of education in general. I know some of the key things that we saw within focus groups and surveys that participants didn't really know about the range of electric vehicles. So kind of educating on range and is charging expensive, things like that. Those were very important also. And then some key takeaways from the survey. One of the things that we found really interesting is there were kind of 3 top strategies that Ohio lawmakers and stakeholders can do to kind of make electric vehicles more accessible and adapt them more. They are, I'm sorry, investing money to help consumers purchase plug-in EVs, increasing availability to the number of charging stations available in different areas across Ohio, and to educate consumers about electric vehicles in general. We also found that a common misconception is participants, when they think of electric vehicles, they typically think of Tesla. So through our focus groups and key informant interviews and things like that, we were able to say, hey, that's not only Tesla, you know, there's a plug-in hybrid, regular electric vehicles, whether it's a Chevy Bolt or a Nissan Leaf, and they're very affordable. So that's something that participants were also able to learn, along with that rebates are offered when purchasing electric vehicles. So just a few key takeaways is that the population from our education and awareness and focus groups and things like that, that they're interested in purchasing electric vehicles, being that they were kind of educated with vehicle cost and charging range and charging infrastructure, incentives and things to reduce the cost of transportation, and that it is necessary to engage larger samples of African Americans to further explore the issue and kind of adapt to electric vehicles. And for the next steps, we have, in conjunction with Clean Fuels Ohio, kind of created a report with recommendations that we've given to stakeholders, lawmakers, people within the EV space on things that they can do, programs that they can do, virtual events that they can do with target demographics to promote e-mobility in the space. And that is all I have. Are we doing questions now or at the end? Sorry about that.
We'll just hold the questions until the end. And again, if anyone has questions, just go ahead and drop them in the chat, and we'll moderate that in the Q&A session. But yeah, I think we can just go ahead and pass it off to Neda now.
And we definitely want to make sure we give a big thank you to Clean Fuels Ohio and their team. They've been a great partner on this project, and we look forward to continue to explore this issue further.
Yeah, thank you.
Hi, everyone. My name is Neda Deylami. As Jennifer mentioned, I'm a transportation electrification field and campaign organizer with the Electrification Coalition. I'll also maybe call it EC. The EC is a national nonprofit that is working to reduce the dependence on oil in our transportation sector, focusing on benefits, both economic, public health, and national security. But today I want to talk to you about my work in Chicago that I did before I started working for the EC for Chicago for Electric Vehicles, or Chicago for EVs. As Jennifer mentioned, Chicago for EVs was a grassroots group that some of us founded in Chicago after finding that there was not enough of an advocacy or a policy focus on the EV conversation in Chicago and in broadly Illinois. So Chicago for EVs was founded to both conduct outreach in the Chicagoland area and across Illinois, but also crucially to advocate for policies that would increase access to electric vehicles for communities that were traditionally more advantaged in having access to those things. So today I just wanted to share with you some maps because I like maps, but I'm also a very visual learner. So I wanted to show you kind of what I see as the representation of how inequitable transportation policy translates into what city can look like, what it can look like for its residents. So some of you may know Chicago is an extremely segregated city. And we can see how car ownership can translate into economic and environmental inequities. On the left here, I have a map of the burden of environmental exposures by population in the Chicago area. The more red is, the worse it is. The south and west sides of Chicago are predominantly Black and brown, tend to be lower income, have access to transit and jobs. And I wanted to juxtapose that with the CTA map, our train system, along with a map of plug share with our network. So you can see that there's a lot of overlap in the trends where inequalities exist on the far southwest sides, the southeast side, the west side broadly. To give you a little bit background of myself, I grew up on the far north side, kind of in a desert of greens, but also a little bit of the red that we see on the far north side in West Ridge. I grew up without a car. I had to take the train everywhere and the bus everywhere. And I really learned that car ownership is a privilege in the city, but also being able to go without a car in the city is also a privilege. We see here that access to transit is unequal depending on the neighborhoods that you live in, but also access to this newer technology with electric vehicles also manifests in the way that charger investments are seen in the city. The south and west sides have little to no public chargers. So I see electric vehicles as a benefit that the communities that are most burdened by transportation costs and pollution can benefit from, but also an incentive for us to focus more on those communities. And the areas that have the fewest environmental burden are also tend to be the highest transit-rich areas, the Loop and the north, the richer and wider north sides. And they also have the most public charging network. And we don't want to be excluding people from the technological and clean transportation advances that we're making in the EV world, just because some places it's easier to go without a car. It's a matter of access to transit, as I mentioned, access to job, also safety, and not only from race, but also if you have a disability, if you're a member of a disadvantaged group, if you're trans, for example, it could be a matter of public safety. And so ideally, we would see transit investment in Chicago being more invested in the Southwest to provide for that. But given that it's not the reality that we live in right now, and unfortunately, public transit funding is bleeding right now because of COVID, we want to make sure that there are options for clean and affordable and convenient transportation, which all of us here know that EVs is the bill. So a few of the policies that we worked on in Chicago for EVs and Illinois was the idea of EV readiness. So that's the idea that electric vehicle charging stations are a matter of electrical infrastructure that are really easily solved at the point of construction. So we actually passed an ordinance here in Chicago last year that would try to provide for that. That ordinance doesn't go far enough. It only affects new construction and certain buildings over a certain size. So it doesn't do much to address the over 3/4 of Chicagoans who live in old housing stock in multi-unit dwellings. So an EV Ready Ordinance that ideally state law that would go farther to affect both new construction and major renovations. It would affect housing regardless of age or luxury status, and it would also be partnered with a right to charge policy that would not disadvantage people who live in multi-unit dwellings, so that they wouldn't have to fight with landlords, homeowners associations to use charging or electricity at a parking spot that they rent or own. These policies can now be found in our big omnibus green infrastructure bill, the Clean Energy Jobs Act. The Clean Energy Jobs Act, also known as CEJA, has a big proponent of clean and renewable energy, utility accountability, workforce training, but also transportation electrification is a big part of it. A bill that I worked on last year is now part of CEJA that would include EV readiness and right to charge. And the bill also includes purchase rebates for low-income households, as well as rebates for installing EV chargers in one's home, requiring a special time of use to make sure that we're not overloading the grid. So that's Chicago for EVs, my work in Chicago, and why equity really manifests itself, I think, in EV policy in the Midwest, but also in other cities that experience the same kind of patterns of disinvestment, discrimination that we're seeing in Chicago. So I look forward to answering any questions you guys have at the end. I think Billy is next.
Thank you. Yeah, I think, yeah, we do have Billy up next. Are you ready to share if you have a presentation? Hey, Billy, I think you're muted right now.
Ironic, because I was asking if everyone could hear me okay. So I just wanted to, and thank you, everyone. I was introduced as the general manager of Jitney EV, which I fully intend to talk about, but I can't without first giving you some background and context, and that is that I'm also a director of a community-based organization known as Bronzeville Community Development Partnership. And Bronzeville Community Development Partnership is a 30-year-old CBO that mission was to preserve and restore Black metropolis, the historic Black metropolis that has been written about and chronicled about the Great Migration from the South to the North. I have like a 90-second video that I'd like to share with you just to give you some context about Bronzeville, and then we can get into the organic evolution of Jitney EV out of the work that we do in Bronzeville.
A century ago, Chicago's African-American business pioneers had restricted access to goods, products, and services. So they built Bronzeville, a city within a city. It became a thriving Mecca with its own economy. It was studied, documented, and known as the Black Metropolis. Over decades, business enclaves like Bronzeville have experienced steep decline. Today, a new breed of talented civic entrepreneurs has emerged. They have preserved the best of the Black Belt, its rich cultural heritage, the historic built environment, plus they have taken the intellectual capital and acumen of the legendary business pioneers. Together, they are working with industry and institutions and have identified a viable community economic development engine. It is the renewable energy platform that will connect the Bronzeville South Lakefront region with smart city infrastructure and IoT. These dedicated developers have found adaptive reuses for existing real estate assets. Their plans incubate new enterprises that will create sustainable solutions. Bronzeville is again inventing and educating a new workforce, a tech talent pipeline that will move the community from blue-collar to green-collar jobs. This 2020 vision has switched on the resilience of human capital that has been stored far too long. The Innovation Metropolis, Chicago's Smart Tech Innovation District.
So, so Jitney EV evolved out of Bronzeville to solve a number of problems. One, we are a smart community, we are a connected community, and you know, our areas of emphasis are generally in tourism and transportation and technology. And we use technology and transportation as economic development platforms based on renewable energy. So um, back in the day, Jitney was a common form of transportation in the Black community. It actually, the term Jitney is found all over the world. But we had a particular brand of Jitney that operated on the south side, south and west side. But on on the south side, you could flag down a Jitney any time of day or night, and for 5 cents, hop in and enjoy a ride share up and down the boulevard. It traveled in a straight line pretty much. But there have always been Jitney operations. We have always found ways to fill that last mile that is left out of most big city transportation plans. So we came up with a 21st century solution to solve economic problems. We looked at eMobility as an economic solution. In Bronzeville in particular, what's missing is we don't have a circular economy. That is, we don't have a centralized business district. And so we came up with a concept called, we didn't invent it, but we tried to introduce the concept of mobility as a service in the Bronzeville community as a solution for our primary destinations, to connect them and to circulate customers. We have on the south side the most landmark rich area in the city. More historical landmarks exist in Bronzeville within the confines of any place like in the city. So we were a lot of those destinations provide a robust industry for tourism, and so tourism. We wanted to connect to facilitate transportation between our anchor destinations like McCormick Place, one of the biggest convention facilities in the country, White Sox Park, Wintrust Arena, all on the north, with Chicago Museum, soon to come Obama Center on the south, lakefront, and our many summertime events on the east, and all of the commercial activity that happen on the corridors in between. So I put up this slide because one of our primary partners is a utility company, ComEd, and their CEO made this pronouncement last summer, and we took that as a clarion call for action. A lot of what we do is participate in stakeholder task forces to try to instigate and inspire change, and contribute to the ecosystem that is responsible for building out the energy efficiency and charging infrastructure that we're going to need to accomplish our goal of achieving a clean energy economy. So our relationship with ComEd is challenging. It is a utility company, and utility companies have their own way of doing business. And without getting too much into the weeds, I know, Ohio has the same issues with utility companies and their power and their overreach and their political influence, as we do in Illinois. But we look at it as our relationship is, we consider the utility community to be frenemies. We enjoy a positive relationship, but we know what they're capable of, and there's a respectful difference, but there's also a respectful interchange and engagement. So it's been chronicled, some of the opportunities and some of the downsides of utility investment in communities. In our case, ComEd created Community of the Future. It was a moniker, but there is substance to it. We have significant engagement with our community partners like IIT, University of Illinois, University Chicago, our national labs. And we leverage these relationships to help advance our initiatives. Look at the ComEd relationship as overall as a positive one. The map I'm sharing, I'm sure I borrowed from Neda or Sam, one of our partners here in Chicago, but this just reinforces the magnitude of the challenge. You know, we're trying to educate Black consumers about the importance of converting to electric vehicle transportation for so many reasons. The practicality, all of which our previous speakers have spoken about. It's much less expensive. But we dig beneath that to some of the overarching social reasons why it's important. Mainly because, and this is one thing, if you can find a silver lining in what COVID has done to us, it did point out the disparity, the comorbidity that affect Black and Brown communities. And so those same comorbidities are the result of where we live, being our proximity to toxic pollution and the generational impact of fossil fuel production. So that's evident in these pockets that Neda pointed to on the north, on the south and west side of the city, where these are the number of registered vehicles. They just don't exist down here on the south side. And similarly, registered EVs per 10,000, can't see it. But on the south side, there's a lack of investment. Why is that? Well, a lot of it is because there's a lack of education. So, we do engage in webinars and public education activities to help inform people what EV ownership is like and what the advantages are. But we find, that there is a racial divide. So our secondary problem is solving the charging dilemma and the range anxiety that results from that. And as you see on the west side and the south side, there just are no charging stations. And so we push for community charging as an opportunity to build out the infrastructure, make it available so that people who are considering converting to electric vehicles have some sense of even subconscious reassurance that the infrastructure will be there. We do invest a lot of time in public education programs. And the last thing I'll wrap up with, as I said, we participate in a number of stakeholder task force to solve problems. This was a transportation issue located in one of the neighborhoods. We're trying to boost ridership at a particular transportation station with a number of solutions as to why. The particular station is located next to a abandoned rail line. And we see this as an opportunity where community charging could be located, where solar powered charging stations can be installed along a service route. And these sorts of recommendations were finalized by an elite group of task force participants. This is an overview of a school near that train station. It's about a block away. This is Dawson Technical Institute. Here is a large parking lot. It's currently used for ComEd training. We want to use this parking lot for community charging and DC fast charging. Adjacent to it is this empty lot here is going to be the new home of the National Society of Black Engineers. They're building a state-of-the-art facility that will be complete zero carbon facility. And also on that space, we're inviting a next generation battery lifecycle management company called Global Battery Solutions. We see this as the future of renewable energy management. So I'd like to I put up my information in case you have questions or would like to follow up after the meeting. I'd like you to visit our website, visit us on Facebook, and look me up on LinkedIn.
Thank you so much to Billy, Neda, Dr. Francis, and Corshonda for all of your presentations. Really appreciate it and appreciate you being here. And at this point, I'd like to go ahead and open up the Q&A. So we usually start this off by asking our guests what kind of got them first into the EV world and set you on that path of working in the EV sector, and also particularly with today's topic, connecting that with equity. If anyone would like to start.
I'll start. As I mentioned, I grew up in a neighborhood that wasn't really well served by public transportation, but I had no option but to use it, and it made my life very difficult getting around as a young person. But when I did get my first car, which was electric, it was a used Nissan Leaf, and I tried to just participate in events that EV owners were at. And I'm sorry if you've heard this story because I say it a lot. I tried to engage with other EV owners and they looked very, very different from me. They were older white men from the suburbs who lived in houses that had garages. And I was a younger woman of color renting in a neighborhood of Chicago that didn't have a lot of charging infrastructure. So they didn't understand my needs. And one of them told me that I should just buy a house, and that would solve my EV charging problems. So that really pushed me to try to share the benefits that I was seeing from owning that Leaf. I didn't pay a cent to charge it because I luckily was a student and I could go to my local Whole Foods and charge for free while I studied. But I had that schedule that allowed me to do that, and a lot of people can't. I wanted to share it with the people who could benefit the most in my city, in my community.
I'm chuckling at Barbara's comment in the chat. I think that's pretty funny. But for me, I came to this space from one being a car enthusiast. I liked different cars and I would go to car shows with my dad growing up. And then, given that I was working in the public health field and doing research at the medical school, that there was a direct tie-in between transportation emissions, air pollution, and frontline communities and the comorbidities that people experience as a result of that. And so that led me to really think about my own personal choices around transportation and mobility. I got an electric vehicle. I also had started with a Leaf, and the Leaf has been great. Love the Leaf. And so that was kind of like a vehicle, no pun intended or pun intended, to really start thinking about some of these issues. And I ran into a lot of the issues that Neda just shared in terms of going to spaces that were, EV groups, and they weren't as welcoming. And I kind of felt like the outsider, the unicorn in the room. So led me to connect with other people that shared similar experiences, interest in EVs, and really wanted to make a difference in terms of changing the landscape and sharing this experience with other people that I knew would be able to benefit from it, from this conversation.
For me, it's going to sound a little different. I first got interested in EVs with my public health background. I was actually taking an environmental health class, and we did kind of a discussion board on EVs. And then I began to look for opportunities within the space. And that's how I got connected to Dr. Francis and have been really connected ever since. And I'm especially interested with like health disparities. So this work has been really good with engaging diverse communities and people who typically aren't at the forefront of conversations when talking about EVs.
Thank you. Billy, did you want to speak to that question as well?
Well, sure. It's a departure for me. My whole career, I was in public relations. I was a press secretary in government. And so this came after years of being a consultant and, shifting into community engagement work. And so, as I said, when I became a director of the Bronzeville Community Development Partnership, we took part in an incubator, and it was sponsored by Bosch anyway, the challenge was to come up with last mile mobility solutions. And we did not want to come up with a solution that, was in competition with Uber and Via and Lyft and so on. We preferred to come up with, find a solution to solve a problem. As I said, our problem was circularity, lack of a circular economy, and try to devise a solution to address that. And digging into that research and the issue, and it just took me further and further into the realm of e-mobility and electrification. And I, in a matter of months, became an advocate for electrification in general, with an emphasis on transportation. And climate change was the pivotal factor for me. Seeing every summer California going up in flames, and every August, dramatic hurricanes, and the billions of dollars that we spend every year to rebuild communities that are devastated by prolonged, damage from climate change.
Thank you. So I have another question. Kind of, some of you, I know Dr. Francis, you come from a background of public health, and Corshonda, you also mentioned that. And Billy, you spoke to the connection, between EVs and climate change and impact on communities. So I was wondering if anyone would want to speak to more of the connection between EVs and public health and why that connection is important.
I am happy to start. So the reason why this connection is important is because transportation emissions, typically it ranges about 30 to 40% of pollution in most of the major metropolitan areas. And so what that means in terms of tangible impact is that communities who are positioned or living next to transportation corridors or in areas that are overly polluted are the ones that are most disproportionately impacted by the said transportation vehicle emissions. And what that ends up meaning is that there's an increased number of individuals going to the ER room. And typically on average, that tends to be African-American children and Latinx young children. And so the vehicle emissions affects the body in a myriad of different ways. So I call it from the tips of your toes to the top of your head. So overexposure to vehicle emissions really impedes brain development. It impedes fertility. It causes a myriad of different respiratory illnesses, as well as cancer, lung disease. And so obviously we know what we can do to really mitigate the impacts of that. So that's why for EVHybridNoire, we're really about multimodal electrification. So electrify as many, pieces of mobility as we can to really decrease the overexposure and impact of particularly communities of color, Black, Latinx, tribal, indigenous populations, rural communities to transportation vehicle emissions.
Thank you. I'm going to bring in some questions from the chat and, bring in some audience members to maybe speak to more of their questions. So we had a question from Harold talking about the companion problem to a number of EV installations is having parking spaces dedicated and protected from ICE car blockages. So wanting to know what has been or can be done to protect those spaces. Harold, did you want to maybe come off mute and speak a little bit more to that question?
The charger stations, okay, let's take Cleveland for an example. I've been there at a pretty common department store. There is, I believe there's maybe 1 or 2 chargers there. And I believe the first week was sort of the honeymoon week. Ever since then, whenever I've driven there, the parking spaces for the electrical chargers are blocked up with ICE cars. So I've even tried different times of day, different days of the week. And it's not just Cleveland, but it's been in a variety of cities. There just seems to be no quote unquote policing in place to try to protect these spaces.
And it also seems like some people seem to sort of go out of their way to like block the chargers.
So I was just, has anything been done, or is there anything sort of planned, or what can we do to maybe support efforts to try to protect these spaces and have them strictly dedicated to EV drivers?
I'd like to offer a solution that Illinois came up with that came from an EV owner. Illinois has a law now that if a car is blocking a charger, it can be an EV, but just not using that charger, you are within your right to call the police and get that car towed. That was a bill that was passed because of an EV owner experiencing that in Illinois. And he just called his state representative and told him about that problem. And it turned into law. So I would strongly advise you to create relationships with your elected officials and make EV ownership a constituency that needs to be protected and encouraged, both on a policy front, but also to make sure that those of us that already have EVs, our rights are protected, and we're able to actually effectively use our cars, use those chargers that should be for public use. But it's really the power of, I believe, like grassroots advocacy and enough people talking about an issue to turn it into law.
Thank you, Neda.
I'm sorry.
Go ahead.
Well, I was being irreverent. You know, when I saw that question in the chat, I thought of Chicago in the winter, and I thought he was talking about ice. That's internal combustion. Wow, that's a really important question, because, you know, here in Chicago, when you have 17 inches of snow, if you dig out a parking space, that space is yours until spring, you know, and it's reserved with kitchen chairs or, you know, whatever furniture is available. And that's the way it's done. So I thought, oh, what if we could do that for electric vehicle charging?
Yeah, my haphazard solution for it a lot of times, because it's not like there being a law prevents it 100%, but my favorite thing to do is go to my local Whole Foods and just put a grocery cart in the spot, because you know the owner's going to get out and move it. But a gas owner that's just kind of try to take advantage of a spot is just going to go to the next one.
Thanks, guys, for addressing that one. I wanted to take it to a question from Gary, which it was answered in the chat, but I wanted to kind of bring this into the larger discussion, and also, you know, have this for anyone who might be watching the recording captured. So Gary was noting that, you know, his experience at EV Ride and Drive events, he noticed a lot of African American participants seemed more aware and interested in Teslas versus other EVs. Did you want to speak a little bit more to that experience, Gary, and maybe we could have a couple of more thoughts around that?
Sure. So at these events, what I would find is that we would have a whole row of EVs there, Tesla, Leaf, Chevy Bolt, And the interest was definitely mostly in the Teslas. And I wondered if that was partly a cultural thing or, what might explain that.
So I will jump in here because this is commonly comes across in a lot of the work that we're doing. And so part of the reason for that interesting phenomenon is that on average, so when we do things with Black, Latinx, tribal communities, as well as general market, specific to African Americans, on average, we have a very different relationship with cars. It's less utilitarian. And so if there's an underlying car culture, and part of that is because cars have meant a lot of different things to African American and Black people in the United States. And part of that is due to systemic historical inequities around transportation and mobility. So when you think of Plessy versus Ferguson in 1892, which was separate but equal transportation, you think about the civil rights movement, the Montgomery bus boycott. In the 30s, it took a German gentleman to realize that Blacks couldn't buy Cadillacs because we weren't, they didn't want to take our money. And so what was happening was that African American and Black people who were able to purchase vehicles, they would have a white person go and buy the vehicle for them because they couldn't get it. So, and it ranged from, educators to celebrities were buying Cadillacs. So this German gentleman realized that this was happening and said, like, we have to change this whole paradigm of not selling vehicles to certain communities. So anyway, so historically, there's been this relationship, and cars have been a sign of success because we weren't able to necessarily purchase the homes where we wanted to or live in the communities where we wanted to. So the outward appearance of success became the vehicle. So Tesla is the ultimate in many people's eyes because that's one of the electric vehicles that I guess people know the most about or they hear a lot about. And some people feel like it's unattainable. So that is typically like the thing the carrot that will draw people to an event. But then you also, in our work that we do, we try to show the variety of price points. So it's not, people think Tesla's a $100,000 car. Well, yes, there are $100,000 plus Teslas, but there's also $30,000 Teslas that are available online right now. So we try to show it's not just about Tesla. We're brand agnostic. We want to show people like, yes, you can get a great used EV, a Leaf, an e-Golf, or whatever it is. And depending on your community, it may start at $6,000 and go up. If you have rebates, like there are in many communities, you might get a car for almost zero. So it really just depends. It's all about really educating and knowing your audience and being like culturally responsive and adapted to your audience.
I could just add, I was very heartened to see the study EVHybridNoire did in Cleveland. Very interested in that sort of consumer research. Anecdotally, the car market in Chicago is much different from the car market in Atlanta. I don't know why, but it seems like people of color have embraced electric vehicle transportation. At least there's a lot of Tesla owners. It's not the same on the South side, and it's true. It's either Tesla or Prius. There's nothing in between. And our folks just respond well to Prius. So I just throw that out there. It is purely anecdotal. I would like to have the data to back it up. That's kind of how that's a driver why we don't see more in my neighborhood. Don't see a lot of EV drivers.
And William, we need to do a project together at myself and Neda, because so we have members who are in the Chicagoland area. And so I think one of the issues is that folks need to see folks that look like themselves in their neighborhood, that have that shared experience, that can tell them how to navigate that parking space,
right,
and, get that chart, where to charge. And so there's a lot of fear and apprehension of this unknown because you're changing 100 years of habit. And so when you think about it, we were driving EVs in the 1910s because Madam C.J. Walker had a Stouffer Waverly electric vehicle. And then things transitioned and pivoted to, fossil fuel. But anyway, I think there's like an opportunity to really amplify and elevate this conversation. There's a number of different brands that have committed to going 100% electric. GM came back last week and said that they, are, laser focused on making this transition. Range Rover, mostly pretty much all of the brands are going electric. I think as you begin to see additional vehicles come to market at varying price points, particularly price points under $30,000, you're going to, and we have to couple that with education and marketing that's culturally representative and appropriate for the different market segments, then you're going to see some uptick in accelerating EV adoption. And with things like this big push by the Biden administration to increase infrastructure, transition the public and government fleets to fully electrification, it's going to be more in the news. So I think people are going to start to become more familiar and start to question, well, what are they talking about with this electrification and electric vehicles? What does this all mean? So I think it's going to become more mainstream. And I know a lot of our organizations here on this call are working to really make sure that we make this technology available for all communities.
Oh, that is so true. And I can't say enough how important it was that that GM put that caddy in the Super Bowl ad. That's going to make all the difference in the world.
Absolutely. We know that African Americans over-index on car purchases and automobiles. GM Cadillac has been one of the flagship brands that we really supported. So that should be really a good market for EVs.
Well, thank you all so much. We're a few minutes over, so I'm sorry to kind of cut off this great discussion. Carla and Marie actually both asked really good questions that I think would be a great note to end on. So Carla was asking, how can we get more Black folks, Indigenous folks, and people of color to attend events like this? And Marie kind of asked, how can we keep up the momentum with this work after this call? So just kind of speaking to how can we keep up this momentum and also continue to involve communities of color in this work?
So I guess I'll jump in. So continue to do events like this, but make sure that you're intentional about who's invited and who's on the guest list or who the VIP guests are. So do things like that. And I think a lot of the planners have been thoughtful about that particular perspective. So, going out, collaborating with other community partners who are serving some of those diverse communities or diverse participants that you want to see at your events. So I think, just developing partnerships, and there are probably already partnerships that you have. So just kind of lean into what you already have in place and leverage those relationships. You don't have to start from scratch. You don't have to recreate the wheel.
I agree with
Absolutely.
I'm sorry. I want to give someone else a chance.
No worries. I think, we are a little bit over, so I think that is going to be a wrap on today's session. So I just wanted to thank you all for coming again. Thank you to Neda and Billy and Corshonda and Dr. Francis for your presentations and the work that you're doing. We do have a few more conversations coming up like this down the pipeline. So I'm going to go ahead and drop the link in the chat where you can sign up for our emails to stay in touch with us. And yeah, we hope that you'll join us for another EVROOM-ZOOM. Thanks again to our speakers. It's really been a pleasure. And thank you to all of our audience members who asked really great questions today. Really appreciate you being here, and have a great rest of your afternoon.
Thank you for having me.
Guys, thank you for having us. Have a great day and stay safe.
You as well. Bye, everyone.
Bye-bye.